Hello everyone. Welcome. I am excited to connect. Today we're going to be talking about believing in your chances, and this is going to be especially helpful if you want to figure out how to stay motivated and hopeful, even when your chances of getting what you want or being able to live the life that you want are not great. I'm going to start by sharing a story about my 9-year-old son. And then I'll share 2 common lies related to believing in your chances. I'm going to talk about how to handle the grim scenarios related to your chances. And then finally, what believing in your chances might mean for you. And there's a link associated with this video for more content. If you go to that link and share your email address, I'm going to be emailing more content about this topic, about how to assess your specific situation and ensure you don't unintentionally create a negative impact from believing in your chances. Okay, it'll be a series of questions and information and some notes from this video, and it'll allow you to get much more out of this and to really apply this to your specific situation. So the link is in the notes. It says get more content. Check that out. Okay. Here we go. Let's start with the story. Story about my 9-year-old son. And this was what really got me thinking about this topic. So I was having a conversation with my son the other day. He's 9 years old, and he's been really into basketball recently. He loves basketball and has been playing a lot of it. And we enrolled him in this club where they're currently doing training. It's specifically just skills training and conditioning. And in a few weeks, this club is going to hold some tryouts, and you can try out to be on their official club basketball team. And my son, Rudy, is his name. Rudy is like, oh my word, I want to be on that club basketball team. And the other day, he asked me, Dad, like, what do you think are my chances of getting on this club team? Like, I'm going to the tryouts, and we've all agreed, yes, he's going to try out for the club team. And he's thinking about it so much, and he's like, what do you think are my chances? And honestly, I'm like, I don't know. I really don't know what your chances are. What do you think they are? And he's like, I think they're pretty good. I was like, oh yeah? Well, when you think your chances are pretty good, how do you feel? What emotion does that create for you? And he's like, motivation. Okay. If you're believing your chances are good and you're feeling motivated, and this is what I asked him next, I'm like, how do you think that's going to change your preparation for the tryouts? He's like, I'm gonna prepare more. I'm like, yeah, and how do you think that's going to change how you perform during your tryouts? He's like, yeah, I mean, I'll be focused. And I said, just by believing that your chances are good, you will be motivated and you actually will increase your chances. And the fascinating part of this is that we don't know what his chances are. Like, or we could do some studies, we could find some information that would conclude that his chances aren't great, but we don't really know. We could do some like probabilities, like, hey, there's 20 people trying out for the team, and only 8 will be selected, and we could find some chances from that kind of math. But that's not how it works. It's so much more complex than that, because his chances are not just based on numbers of players trying out. It's based on their skills, who's trying out, and it also depends on how they show up on that day of tryouts. there's other factors related to what the coaches are looking for. And we don't know all that information. There's so many details, there's so many complexities here that really knowing what his chances are isn't absolutely certain. And so he could believe his chances aren't great, and he could believe his chances are great. And either way, he's perfectly valid in that belief. It's a perfectly reasonable belief. And it just was so fascinating when we were talking about this and realized, hey, if you just believe, and it came to, like, I didn't plant this in his mind. I asked him, what do you believe your chances are? And he said, I think my chances are good. And him believing that is making him motivated and is actually increasing the chances that he'll make it on the club team. So this applies to whatever you want, whatever I want, whatever we would like to do or achieve. If there's something we used to be able to do, but no longer able to because of pain, what you believe right now about your chances of getting what you want, or the chances that you'll get your life back, will have an immediate impact on you right now. So let's transition now to talk about the two common lies that get in the way of believing in your chances. The two common lies. There's a number of things that we could talk about. I'm just narrowing this down to a few things that we can talk about. So here's one common lie that I think gets in the way and that I've experienced. It is believing that external sources can tell us what our chances are. We think that if someone tells us our chances, that we have to believe that, and that is the truth. Or we might find some research or some studies that tell us what the chances are for whatever thing we're interested in, and we take that as truth about us. Here's the thing. In some cases, if we're listening to other people who are telling you your chances, they might be sharing their view that really has no scientific support. For example, this scenario with my son. I could have shared my view. I could have just said, hey, you know what? I think you have like a 40% chance of making the team. And I have nothing to back that up. There's no good evidence. It's just my own opinion. But if he were believing this lie that external sources tell us what our chances are, he'd just accept it. He would have listened to me, and he would have been like, oh man, my chances aren't that great. I have only a 40% chance of making this team. And that's a trap that he would have fallen into, and that's a trap that we fall into all the time. We hear predictions or chances, and people say things, and we might just accept it as truth, when in fact it's not supported in any way. Okay, but what if it is supported? What if there are some good studies and some good research? I do think research and studies have a place and are very useful. Here's what I also know. Studies that I might find are done with people, lots of people or less people, whatever, but they're done with people, all these people, and who's not included in that study? Me. And you. Unless, of course, there's a study you participated in, and you're taking the results from that study. But even in that case, there's some interesting things to consider, which I can maybe talk about a bit later. But sure, the study is done on humans, and as humans, we have a whole lot in common. And there's some reasonable connection and conclusions that can be made from those studies that are pertinent to us because we're also humans. But humans, especially bodies and health and emotions and beliefs and all those things, they are so complex. So complex. So just because a study done on other humans says a certain thing or shows certain scientific results, it doesn't mean it will absolutely be the case for me or for you. The other thing to be aware of when it comes to studies and chances and averages and all these things, For example, let's just talk about averages. This is a very common stat that people will center around, and they'll base their chances on an average. Do you know what, you know, do you know what averages tell you about the population? Well, they tell you what's sort of in the middle, right? The average doesn't actually tell you about all the individuals in that population. Um, in fact, there could be an average that is stated that was the result of some population that represents no individual. I mean, this can happen all the time, especially if averages are in like, you get as precise as an average is calculated that has decimal points, you know? And maybe the calculations for individuals were all whole numbers. So the average doesn't actually represent an individual. But some other ways to talk about this, let's take, for example, life expectancy. I was just looking, I'm just pulled from some source to grab this Google search. Life expectancy of men is 75 years old. But here's the thing. It could be that most men die between 65 and 70. And there's a good chunk of a group of men that die between 80 and 85. And that's how we get this average of 75. Or we could have another scenario where most men die at 80, but a handful of people die in their 50s, which are bringing the average down to 75. I don't know. Or it could be a normally distributed data source, which that's often the case. But the point is, even if it's normally distributed and we have like this bell curve where most people are dying around the age of 75, what is important to still acknowledge and realize is that there's also the people on the tail ends of that bell curve, people who die much earlier than that and people who die much later than that. And the problem is that people will take an average like 75 and just assume, oh, that's about when I might die. Like that's a life expectancy of men. But the truth is, that's telling me the average. That's not telling me about any of the individuals, and there's a whole distribution of those individuals. And even if we take that distribution of individuals, those are people in the past. That's not, and it might have these analytics that are predicting into the future and all those things, but still, I'm not, that's all predictive analytics. None of that is actually taking into the specific considerations and factors of me. But do you know what? I had someone also ask me recently, since I have rheumatoid arthritis, they're like, hey, speaking of specific factors and considerations for you uniquely, you have rheumatoid arthritis. Have you looked at the life expectancy of people with that disease? I at the time this person asked that question, I was like, no, I have no idea. I've never looked that up. I did look that up just recently, and it's 65, right? So people, men with rheumatoid arthritis, are expected to die 10 years earlier. 10 years, earlier than those without rheumatoid arthritis. Okay, fine. But again, that's not the case for all of them. And even within a disease, there's all kinds of variability. And people's condition of their disease is all over the charts, right? And so it's just being aware of what these stats are saying and what they are not saying, how applicable they are to you and how applicable they aren't. One other interesting example that has less to do with averages, but it still demonstrates this point. Weather. The weather forecast. It's so common with weather forecasts. We'll look at the forecast for today and look at the percent chance of rain, right? What are the chances that it might rain today? And we get exactly what we're looking for. We get a percentage. But do you know what? There's no such thing as a day of 30% rain. It either is going to rain or it's not, right? you either get a day where it rains or a day where it doesn't rain. But we use this number to give us maybe the chances it might rain. But this number is the way this calculation often is made is, for example, it might look over a 10-day period. We can use this as a simple example. We look over a 10-day period. Given the factors of climate of this day, and looking at a 10-day period of other days that had similar conditions, of those 10 days, it rained on 3 of those days. Okay, so that's how we get the 30%. Fine. I mean, it serves some purpose and it helps us get a general sense of like, might it rain? But realize that this stat actually doesn't represent any one day. Like, there's no such thing as a day that has 30% rain. It either rains on that day or it doesn't. And so that's the point that I'm trying to make here as it relates to your chances for getting what you want, is that it's a percentage that might not actually be able to represent anything meaningful, like anything actual. It could be useful, right? It's useful. It gives us a general idea, but be aware of these limitations and these common lies about data, right? And chances and averages. So a common lie or a common a misstep is when we look at research, we look at chances, and we just immediately apply that to ourselves. That might not always be the case, and each one of us is unique, right? All right. The second common lie is that how we are now is how we will always be. We think that if we are in a certain way now, it's always going to be that way. But here's the thing. We're always changing, especially when it comes to this topic of living an abundant life despite pain or physical limitation. Our bodies, our minds, our emotions, our health is constantly changing. And there's a term used to describe this: bioplasticity, right? Bioplasticity is this term that describes the real phenomenon, the real thing that takes place in life and in our bodies, which is that we adapt to our environment. There's constant adaptation. There's constant change. I've heard of so many stories of people who had major pain for years, for a long time. And they experienced some type of change, and now their pain is so different. I'm an example of one of those people. Never 10 years ago would I have believed you if you said, hey, Luke, 10 years from now, you will be having such a different experience with your physical pain that you'll be able to do push-ups without much difficulty or without a whole lot of pain. And you will be able to run obstacle races, including monkey bars, 8-foot walls to climb over, 80-pound buckets to carry, rope climbs. You're going to be doing all those things. 10 years ago, I would have said, are you kidding me? Are you crazy? How could that be possible? This is the crazy thing, is that there's always change taking place. Our bodies are always changing. Our brains are always changing. Our emotions are always changing. We're in a constant state of change, especially in response to environment. And so if you find yourself in this place where you're thinking, like I was 10 years ago, that things are always going to be the way that it is now, remember, like just realize that there's so many people who have experienced change. You might be like, yeah, that's not going to be me. But how do you know? How do you know that's not going to be you? I mean, maybe you really know, maybe that's fine. But what I'm trying to say here is that there is always change taking place. Let's see. I'm just checking my notes to see if there's anything else I want to point out on this particular lie. All right, I think that's it. Okay, so those are the two common lies. Common lie number one: you believe external sources are a source of truth, like other people, other things, other research. If they tell you what your chances are of achieving what you want, you just take that as truth about you. Common lie number two is that how we are now is how we will always be. Let's see. Okay, let's transition now. How do you handle the grim scenarios related to your chances? I want to speak about two particular situations. There's no estimate. There's no estimate. There's no way to really know what your chances are. This is, for example, my son's chances of making the basketball team. There's no way to really know. Or the chances that you'll be able to get your life back, or that your pain will go away, or that your situation will change. Do we really know? You might be in a situation where there's no studies, there's no estimates. Or the other scenario is that there are studies about your specific situation. Like me being able to look up what's the life expectancy of people with rheumatoid arthritis. There's some studies, there's some information, there's an estimate. Okay, that estimate exists. And you might be in a scenario where you can find estimates about what your interest is. I'm using an example of life expectancy, but when it comes to your situation and what you want, think about what you want to achieve, what it means to have your life back. Maybe it's to exercise more or again, or maybe it's to be able to just go on a walk, or maybe it's to have a mental state or emotional state where you can work again. Whatever those kinds of things, whatever that thing is that you want, does data exist? Is there an estimation that might tell you what your chances are? Or is there no estimation? All right, so those are like the kind of two situations to think about. There's either an estimation or there's not. If there's no estimate, you get to decide. You get to choose what you want your chances to be. Like my son, who said, I think my chances of getting on the team are good. He gets to decide entirely. And it's a perfectly valid view. If there is an estimate, however, if there is some study, some research, some stat, well, guess what? You still get to decide. You still get to decide. Even if the estimate is grim, like the estimate I just shared about my situation with life expectancy. I'm expected to die at 65. Honestly, when I saw that, maybe it's because of all the work that I've done around belief. There's not any part of me that believes I'm going to die around 65. I just completely reject that. Others, though, you might be in a situation where you see a stat and you're just like, oh, shoot, that's the reality for me. And that's what I'm pointing out. That, be aware of that. That might be a trap you're falling into. You're falling into this idea that you're going to die at 65 because of this stat. But it might not be true. We don't really know. We don't really know for your situation. Even though they've studied people with rheumatoid arthritis and saw that their life expectancy is 65, I'm like, yeah, but I wasn't in that study. And maybe I'm ignorant. I'll talk more about that too, but ignorance. But part of the reason why I just reject that is because I didn't see that study till recently. I didn't see that stat. And I've been practicing belief. Honestly, I believe I'm going to live until 100. And at least 100. I don't know. I just adopted that. I just started imagining that for no good reason. Just as I think about my own life and think about the life I'm creating and my goals and what I want to achieve, I'm like, I want to live to at least 100. And that's just what I believe. So I see 65, I'm like, I don't know what they're talking about. So even if there's a stat, you still get to decide what you want to believe your chances are. You get to decide. So let's see. Am I going to be talking about ignorance later? Yeah. I am. Okay. I'm going to be addressing this topic. Some of you might hear this and be like, man, he's ignorant. He's kind of living in this world of bliss that's not connected to reality. I'm going to just talk about that a little bit more a little bit later. But let me just talk now about what believing in your chances might mean for you. And I'd like to just ask you a few questions. First, what would you like to believe about your future that you aren't believing because of a statistic? Second, what conclusions are you making because of others' experience that might be limiting you? What conclusions are you making that might be limiting you that are based on the experience of others? That's another way to phrase the question. And finally, what would change for you right now in your emotional and physical world if you were to let yourself believe in your chances? If you believed in the chances you can live despite your pain, the chances that you can do something no one else says you can, the chances that you can get what you want back in your life, the chances that you can live again, the chances that you can be great. Even if you didn't get the thing you wanted, consider this. Say you believed in what you want. Say that, like, I'm just taking this example of living till I'm 100. Even if I died closer to the life expectancy of 65, is the motivation and energy that you might experience by believing in your chances reason enough? And applied to myself, is the energy and motivation I'm getting now from believing that I'm going to live until I'm 100 reason enough to believe that I'm going to live till 100 instead of believing I'm going to die around 65? And if you really consider that, the thing never happens. You believe in something that never happens. It turns out you end up being wrong. So what? That thing is in the future. I mean, if you can believe in your chances of getting something that impacts you now, that changes your current life experience, why wouldn't you? So why wouldn't you? Maybe you'd say, well, I'm concerned about the disappointment I'll face. You know how disappointing it would be to believe, like for my son, to believe in his chances of getting on this team, and then it turns out he doesn't get on the team. He's going to face a lot of disappointment, right? But if you look at the scenario where he believes his chances are low, so say instead of believing his chances are high, say we just like, Rudy, your chances are only like 10%. Let's believe in that. So you don't have to be disappointed if you don't make the team. But what are we creating? We're creating disappointment now. We're creating disappointment now that his chances are so low. So you can believe in low chances in the thing that you want and be disappointed now, or you can believe in good chances and get all the motivation and energy and the fuel that comes from that belief, and then be disappointed later if it doesn't turn out the way you want it. So now here I'm going to address the idea around ignorance. Maybe the concern is about being viewed as ignorant or foolish for believing in something that, like in this case, people are like, you're crazy to believe you're going to live to 100 when you have rheumatoid arthritis. Well, my response to that is like, okay, well, if being like realistic or being informed or educated or wise, in other words, if I must believe that I'm going to die at 65 to be considered informed, wise, educated, or realistic, and that means I live with some discouragement, some apathy, some disappointment. Honestly, when I think that I might die at 65, that would dramatically change my energy right now, my life, my goals. And I would be living in discouragement, apathy, disappointment. And if that's what it requires to be a person who's realistic, who's informed, who's educated, oh my word, I'll take ignorance any and every day so I can live with energy and motivation now. Maybe ignorance isn't all that bad. And people could just say, I'm ignorant all day and be like, man, he's so full of it. And I'll say, yes, I am. And guess what? I'm living an amazing life right now because of it. I'm feeling so full of energy because I'm foolish, because I'm ignorant. You can call me that all day and I don't care because of what it's creating for me. It's creating such a life of energy. I have so much more vitality. Okay, so those are just some things to consider, right? Like, maybe we just ought to consider believing our chances are good. And, or if chances are bad, maybe we ought to consider believing that that's not going to be the case for us. All right, there's a whole lot more to consider. And that's what I'm going to share by email. So if you want to receive more of my content, some of these notes, a bit of a summary, plus I'm going to share, like I said at the beginning, I'm going to share some more content about how to assess your situation to really determine, what might be the downside of believing in your chances. And let's just get clear, because there could be some unintentional negative impact on your life if you were to believe your chances are good of getting what you want, right? So I'll share a bit more content, some questions that you can review to help assess your specific situation. If you'd like that, go to the link that says more content, and you'll receive that by email. And that is all for now. Have a wonderful week, a wonderful rest of the day, and we'll speak again soon. Bye, everyone.